Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Thursday. As you're getting into the webinar today, feel free to open up the chat and introduce yourself. Go ahead, put in your name, your role, where you're hailing from. I'm hailing from Chicago today. It is very sunny and icy cold, so we're eagerly waiting for summer over here. So go ahead, introduce yourself. We'll get started in just a moment. Go through some housekeeping before we dive into the discussion. So thank you for joining. And if you're tuning in from Packback, I'd love to know who you are. Say hello. Hi, everyone. All right, Scottsdale, great to see you. We have really good West Coast representation right now on this webinar. I'm the odd one out. Also, good time to note, I did have to work from home today, and we will get a guest speaker. That was unintended, and that is my dog, Ellie. So apologies in advance. Just some housekeeping before we get started and introduce the lovely panelists today. This will be recorded, and the recording will be sent out to everybody who RSVP'd and attended. And you can access all recordings at packback.co/webinars. We have the Q&A feature fully unlocked. So as you have questions, please use the questions feature within Zoom. You can upvote, you can answer them. It's like I said, I've really unlocked it and it's open. The chat's also unlocked and unopened. So if you have things that you would want to share, resources, etc., use the chat for chat and then use the Q&A for Q&A. And that's pretty much all I got. You'll also get access to this deck afterwards, which has some good resources and links. So without further ado, let's do some introductions. My name is Kelsey Behringer. I am the CEO of Packback, which is an instructional AI organization. We've been in the space for about 9 years before it was cool to be an AI company. So we used to not even say it out loud. I started my career as a high school chemistry and physics teacher and joined Packback looking for something at the intersection of inquiry-based learning and technology. So that's where I ended, and 7.5 years later, here I am. So super, super happy to be joined today with some lovely panelists. So Kel, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and pass the mic.
Absolutely. So good. It's noontime for us. I was going to say good afternoon. I guess it's 2 minutes past 12, so technically it's afternoon to everyone. I know some of you it's later in the day. I saw some North Carolina folks on the webinar here, so great to see you all. I'm the superintendent in Desert Sands Unified School District. We're located in Southern California, right near Palm Springs. And I was telling Kelsey that I'm sorry she's cold, but we've got our air conditioners cranking right now because it's already heating up outside where we are. We serve just under 27,000 students in Desert Sands, and very grateful for the work and super excited to be joined on this webinar with two amazing people. But we'll start with Tiffany Norton, who I have the pleasure of working with.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm Tiffany Norton. So excited to be here to talk about a topic that's super important to me right now and all of us. I'm the Chief Innovation and Information Officer. I oversee educational and network services side of the house, as well as educational technology network side of the house and student information services for our district, Desert Sands.
All right, I'm Kris Hagel. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Peninsula School District up in Gig Harbor, Washington. So been doing this for, gosh, this is my 26th year now in ed tech and K-12 ed tech. And so I just saw somebody in the chat from the district I used to work in. So it's great to see people here that still connections from many, many years ago. So glad to be here.
Yeah, I love seeing we've got good representation from Mankato to Virginia. Wow, hello. Also, I'll be in Duluth in a month for what is it, Grandma's Marathon? So maybe I'll see you. They're so far away from each other. That's a wild thing to say. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about the urgency behind ethical use of AI and specifically student use of artificial intelligence in K-12. We'll talk about the work that has been done at the districts represented by the panelists, it's some incredible work. I'm very, very, very excited to share. And then we're going to talk about how we scaffold AI literacy in a way that's responsible and thoughtful. And of course, as I mentioned, use the Q&A feature within Zoom, because as questions pop up, we'll go ahead and put them in front of the panelists. So I think we all can feel the urgency of action right now. We're starting to hear from industry, specifically business owners that they want to be hiring AI literate graduates. And we're starting to see it also represented in legislation, right? And we're starting to see the government encourage implementation, and again, thoughtful implementation of AI for learning, AI for teacher effectiveness within the K-12 space. So I would love to just hear from panelists, when I think back to the inception of ChatGPT, like the very viral headline, the college essay is dead, the reactions to generative AI in late 22, early 23, or late 21, early 22, is that timing? I'm going to get that wrong. To the reactions and the work you're doing in your districts now. So if you could just talk us through, if anybody wants to start on kind of the transformation that's happened and the change in sentiment around generative AI and just AI in general.
I can jump in initially and just share for us. I mean, we talk quite a bit about, we feel there's a moral imperative to be having these conversations, right, and having these trainings. And that really stems from our vision in Desert Sands, which I don't think is much different from educational institutions across the nation. And that being that our vision is to successfully prepare students for college, career, and life, right? And so we understand that if we're going to fulfill that vision and successfully prepare them, it can't be absent of AI education, because the jobs already, I mean, you're seeing CEOs right now putting out mandates, and Tiffany can probably speak more to that, that their employees will use, the expectation is they will use generative AI, right? And so if our students are walking into those jobs, we have to prepare them. It's built into our DNA and who we are and what our vision is as a district.
I think Kelly hit on it perfectly right when she mentioned those memos. Shopify CEO sent one out a couple of months ago now, I guess, maybe a month ago. Duolingo CEO just sent one out. We're starting to see companies speak more open about their expectations. And so as an educational institution, if we're truly saying that we're preparing our students for college, career, life, we would be doing them a disservice if we did not address it in any way, shape, or form. We have to prepare them for what's coming once they leave us after they graduate.
I think the other thing I would add to kind of tie both of their statements together is, that I think it was the Shopify memo, maybe it was the other one, but they said, we are not going to hire more people until you can prove to us that AI can't do this job. And so, when you come back, you tie that back to Kelly's moral imperative, we have to make sure that our kids know that they're going into a workforce like that when they leave here, that, people are looking to find ways that AI can do that work. And then, what is the work that you can do to kind of fill in the gaps where that doesn't take place. And so, yeah, it's a big part of what we have to be doing.
I think that's important, Kris, too, because the Work Trend Index report came out too last week or the week before from Microsoft, where they talk about the frontier firm, right? Which is going to get us to a point where there are human-led, agent-operated teams. And so if businesses are talking about it, we need to be preparing our students to enter that workforce.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it was 2 months ago, adopted Gemini, which is across the Google Suite. We're a Google organization, and we're basically tightening, right? Everyone's using Gemini. And then if you read, I think it was Ethan Mollick talked about the secret cyborgs, which are people in your organization that are using AI in incredible ways, but might not be super transparent about it because they're nervous. Are they going to get in trouble? Are they doing something they shouldn't be doing? So there's this imperative within our staff to be able to address this, this elephant in the room, and say, hey, I'm not going to be upset if you've unlocked some sort of massive efficiency or effectiveness gain, and then start figuring out ways to actually celebrate and highlight those people in your organization. So I think I love hearing the Shopify memo.
I agree. And I'll just add too, Kelsey, not just the people that have already done great things and putting them in a place where they're celebrated and they can become trainers even, and helping. Tiffany, I got to just share, did this amazing job earlier today. We've been working for a couple of years, and I know we'll get to it later with our guidance document, but she kicked it off with our administrators this morning, and we're kicking it off with the rest of the staff over the next 24 hours. And our principals are fantastic, but we have these all-day principal meetings, and they get a little mentally heavy, right? And so as part of her presentation, she launched these trainings that we'll be doing, teaching them how to build their own custom AI assistants, right, to this market report that she mentioned, I've never seen them more engaged. They were so excited to build their own team of assistants to help them to do their work. It was pretty awesome using Gemini.
Love that.
Yeah.
Amazing. So I want to talk a little bit about some things that came up when we first met, and that was so much of the AI in education conversation is right now about teacher efficiency. You have so many tools that are making our teachers more efficient in prompt creation, rubric creation, lesson planning, which is wonderful, but it's really one opportunity. And there are a lot of opportunities out there to make things better with AI. And one of those is AI literacy for students, supporting student outcomes, and then also preserving critical thinking and authenticity. So I just love to hear from the panelists, how do we reframe the conversation to start including how we're empowering student learning, empowering student creativity with AI, and why is it so important we do this now, alongside the teacher efficiency discussions?
Well, I'll jump in. I think just to further demonstrate the need to reframe the conversation, right? I don't think any of us would feel sad if a teacher had a lighter workload, right? We're in favor of that. Nobody's against that. Our teachers work really, really hard and they're rock stars for that. However, if we want students, so let's say a teacher uses generative AI and they write a lesson plan that's differentiated and meets all the students' needs, and that's fantastic, but that's back-end work that the students may or may not know that was even utilized, right? So you're missing this really rich, incredible opportunity to model for your students how to ethically use AI, but also how to use AI to amplify your own intelligence and your own creativity. So fine, use it for that, lighten your workload, but then also why not create your own assistant, right? That you have built in the parameters, teaching this assistant how they can assist students with the assignment that you're going to give them, and then launch the assistant with the assignment while you're explaining to the kids how you built it, why you built it, why you thought it was appropriate at this time, and then allow them to utilize it, right? That's modeling of like work that they'll be doing in the workforce once they get there, right? So much better use than just simply easing your workload. Again, not that we're against it.
No, we have a teacher that he's a high school chemistry teacher, and he's been doing this. He's been a part of my AI action research team for 2 years now. And he does that now. He will show the kids in his high school chemistry classes how he has built these assistants to help them learn some of their chemistry skills. But he'll walk them through the prompts, he'll walk them through everything, and he walks them through how to write answers back to have it help you, or how to write. He's actually has an assignment where it's build your own assistant to help you learn these topics in chemistry, which I'll be honest, I was never a science person. He shows this to me and I'm like, I don't even know what those words mean. But he has his kids going through this and using these custom built assistants to do that. It's been fascinating work.
And I think, Kelsey, what I heard from Kelly and Kris is that it's all human centered and human focused first, right? I don't think either one of us are focusing on tools necessarily, as far as making sure that we are, like Kelly said, amplifying the human advantage and making sure that we're putting across the message that AI is to be used as a teammate, and not just a tool, right? And we're teaching skill sets to support that, because I think we've all probably experienced, if you think back to your early use of AI, you put in a prompt that you thought was great and didn't get the response that you wanted. And so we're trying to teach and trying to reinforce that thinking and decision making and prompting so that we're using the AI tools as teammates.
I love that. And we got a really good question about creating assessments that enable students to demonstrate their preparedness to use AI. That's actually going to be the topic of our entire part 3. So I'm gonna sit on it and hold it if that's okay. But speaking of, I think this is a great opportunity to transition and talk about the work that's been done very specifically within your districts. So both districts represented today have done, I would say, incredible, thoughtful, innovative work to bring in I would say, pedagogically aligned, safe use of AI with a lot of scaffolding, and just a lot of, honestly, like the way I think about it is professional development as well. When you're that clear on how we should be leaning into AI and how we should be perhaps thoughtful about, avoiding common pitfalls. So I'm going to first chat a little bit about just getting started on this work. So I'd love to hear from everyone here. What were your first critical steps in getting your AI guidelines or AI resource centers created? What were kind of those first steps? How did it begin? Who was involved?
So we took our first year an education approach. Things were changing so quickly that we needed to just educate and kind of get our feet under us. And so year one for us, which was last year, was educate, 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 and kind of making sure that we were pulling in research that we felt would connect to what we were trying to do as a district. And then we did some AI playgrounds where people could just come in and experiment and play and ask questions, just to kind of take a little bit of that anxiety off of experimenting with something that felt foreign in the beginning. And everything that we've done, I do want to say this too, though, has been grounded in who we are as a district. And so if I had to give someone like a hot tip, it would be that make sure that any work that you're doing around AI is grounded in who you are as a district. And so we have a very strong set of mission vision, and a strong set of values. And our tagline just happens to be "the future is here," which really played into that nicely for me. But we wanted to make sure that we were educating, and keeping the human at the center of everything that we were doing.
Yeah, so we kind of we took a little bit different tact on how we started with this. Back in 2022, even pre-ChatGPT days, the superintendent at the time had called me in one day and he said, "Hey, I don't want a technology department anymore." He said, "Go talk to the curriculum director and figure out what you're going to call your new department." And so we had this department for a couple years before this, called the Department of Learning and Innovation. It was technology and curriculum, teaching and learning. Everybody was together. And so it allowed us to do some some things that were really fascinating. And so when ChatGPT came out, like my engineers on the net, on the back end of all of our technology systems are sitting 10 feet away from our instructional facilitators. And so every day when ChatGPTs came out, they're bantering back and forth. My tech guys are saying this is going to change the world. And instructional people are like, this is just another thing that you tell us about that we're never going to need. And so finally, some of them came around and we realized we better start dealing with this. And so that's when we started sitting down. This was January of 23. We started with our high school English teachers and said, "Hey, this is going to change your world. This is going to be your calculator moment that your math teacher peers went through 10, 15 years ago." And so we started from there, and we just kind of we formed what we called our AI Action Research Team, which was a group of back then about 30 teachers that we brought together from every level, in secondary primarily. We kind of left off elementary at the time. And just to explore and experiment with what we're doing. And throughout that whole spring of 23, we were getting into May, and they're like, "Hey, we really need the district to come out and say something about what AI is going to look like next year." And so that's where we came up with our first draft of our AI guidance. We've had it now for 2 years. And it's evolving. It evolves every year. As we learn more, we make it changes and additions to it. But yeah, that's how we kind of got started. And we've just built off of that core group of teachers over 2 years now to kind of where we are now. But we can talk about more of that later.
And if I can just plug in really quick, I think Kris said something that is a gold nugget moment, right? And that's the conditions that exist in the background that allow you to do the work, right? So we equally, back in 2019, I want to say, Tiffany, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had technology working in a silo and ed services working in a silo. And so we literally moved everyone's cheese. We moved desks. We set our project facilitators in technology, we set them next to our curriculum experts so that they had to co-plan and work together. We moved all of technology under ed services, so they're all in the same meetings together. They're working together. They're planning together. And that includes all of our network people and our programmers and all of that. So having those conditions in place, I think makes all the difference in the world. If you're still working in deeply embedded silos, doing this work is going to be even harder than it already is.
I love that. I think that's a great follow-up, because I would love to hear, you talked a little bit about how you got started with this work, putting together district level guidelines and resources around artificial intelligence. What's something else you learned along the way that was just critical to making this successful that maybe you didn't think of going in and you would want to share to anybody else in your shoes?
So as I mentioned, ours kind of evolves over time, and we, as we learn more about what's going on in our buildings with artificial intelligence, we're always able to adapt and adjust. Um, I would walk in on these conversations that are taking place, and I'm like, I don't know if that's really where we want to be going. I was telling this story yesterday to someone, and it was, I'd walked up on some of our HR staff, and they were talking about how they really wanted to use AI to evaluate applications when they came in, and I just was like, oh, like every beat part of me was like, no, that there's so many really bad ideas there. Like I understand where you're trying to go, but let's look at some of the historical research around bias in large language models and what that can do with job applications and candidates. And so, we started to realize, all right, we've got to have some conversations around data privacy, data security. What are the appropriate uses of AI with data? And so that's something we've evolved into this year. We were seeing that kind of in multiple different levels. Teachers talking about, well, I was going to put this IEP in here in this tool. And I'm like, yeah, I can work with you on ways to do some of these things safely, but let's have these conversations first. Like, don't just go to the free version of ChatGPT and dump in a student's IEP plan. Like, let's not do that. So, those are the kinds of things that as you evolve, when you're Desert Sands, I think, has the luxury of like coming out now and being able to see all the mistakes that maybe somebody like me made, and saying, this is great, but we were building it kind of as we were going, and so we'll make mistakes and we'll adjust and we'll adapt and move on from there.
My CTO says a great thing, by the way, which is if you don't pay for it with dollars, you're paying for it with data. And that's his framework. So a really great little motto if you need it for training. But yeah, Tiffany.
I love that. I need to write that down so I don't forget that. I'm going to use that somewhere. I think the one thing that I learned, communicate early, often, and ask questions. And what I mean by that is there are pockets of people who are kind of coming out of the woodwork now, emailing and asking me questions that if I should have had the forethought to reach out to those people to say, hey, this is what we're doing. What questions do you have? How will this impact your current context? And how can we build in supports ahead of time just to kind of alleviate some of the anxiousness, and also to make sure that we have a really robust document. I am very proud of the work that we've done, but and like Kris said, I think that there will be iterations as things continue to move and change, but communicate early, often, and ask questions.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, I think Kris and their team did something that was really awesome. And we were just having a conversation, like I said, a few hours ago. I was sitting with all the high school principals as Tiffany was rolling out her presentation. And so she doesn't know this yet, but I volunteered her for some training right at the beginning of the school with all the high school teachers. But I think starting with your high school English teachers, there's so much wisdom in that, right? Because they're going to probably be the most impacted. They're probably also going to be your biggest either, and I don't mean this negatively, but resisting, right, out of fear and concern, and rightly so, because there's concerns out there. So really spending that extra time early on to work with them, I think, is really time well spent.
High school English teachers, they have high expectations. They're a good bench to go to if you want to see if some things pedagogically aligned are going to be good for learning. That's what I've learned in my days. Well, I want to spotlight some specifics coming out of both districts. So Desert Sands, y'all have an amazing guidebook. I spent a very long time looking through it. And one thing I love about it are the very specific scenarios. So you'll discuss a topic, something like data privacy, something like authenticity or originality or integrity. And then you give an example of how generative AI could be used. And I'll say the right way or the wrong way. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you've built these scenarios and how you see continuing to advance this, I'd say, amazing mechanism for, like I said, professional development. I think people just learn from case studies and they learn from modeling and they learn from practice. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how this came about and how you continue to snowball over here.
Sure. So part of our AI guidance document is something called the RISE framework. And so, like I said earlier, we really wanted to make sure that we were modeling prompting the human before the machine and using AI as teammates. And so we have this RISE framework. RISE stands for respect, integrity, support, and empathy. All of that grounded in our mission, vision, values, right? And our portrait of a graduate competencies. And so as part of that decision-making framework, we needed something that leaders, learners, and educators could use to kind of teach the framework, if you will. And so that's where the scenarios came about, partially to kind of push the message forward in the guidance, but then also just as real world scenarios that principals can use to support their staff through the RISE framework, teachers can use to support their students through the RISE framework, and that decision-making piece, because we aren't focusing on tools, we're focusing on teaching how to make decisions in the moment that will impact your AI use. And we felt that that was more impactful as we prepare people to go to college, career, and life. And so these are two scenarios from our guidance, but then we also have an accompanying toolkit that has more specific scenarios, and it's divided into three pieces: learners, leaders, and educators. And they're specific, those scenarios are specific to that role, and then walks them through with a reflection, questions tied to respect, integrity, support, and empathy, and then also a sample AI prompt. And so that they can practice and use it in real life. So it's not abstract. We're taking it from the abstract down to reflection and then teaching them with the sample how to prompt appropriately. And then and there's a couple scenarios each for each section as of right now, but that's really was the thought behind these scenarios.
Yeah, and those scenarios too, I'll just add the expectation, especially with the learner ones, right, is that teachers would use those in class to explicitly, over time, we're building out a whole slew of scenarios for them to use to over time to train students and help them to think ethically about their use of AI.
I love this. It's just so clear. Something that I have my team do, and I call them gemstones because it's Gemini is what we use. I love a good brand. But we have a Slack channel where folks share their workflows. And I think really like this is a scenario in which we need to be, to your point, Tiffany, over communicating and oversharing. And when somebody does share a scenario, be able to elevate that so that folks can learn from it. But it really is a scenario of modeling in every direction.
We have our AI task force too that's working on. So our AI task force is kind of like Kris's AI research team. That they're from every different aspect of the district, and they're writing scenarios also. One, so that they have a little bit of an ownership of the work and can kind of champion in their respected work locations, but also so that we're getting up-to-date real life scenarios that they're interacting with students.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. And we just know it's about to get even more nuanced and there are more tools and more capabilities. So we'll just need to keep rolling. All right, to spotlight the work at Peninsula, it's very similarly put together some exceptional resources for all of the district. And one thing I found exploring the stuff you shared, Kris, and the links you shared is official guidance, but also within the official guidance, syllabus language for an educator. And I really loved this specifically, expectations for students. I think it's a very student-forward approach. I think it assumes the best of our learners, and I think it also is very clear of what your expectations are. So if you would chat a little bit about how you started building, I know you talked about your team, your research team that built this, but
Mhm.
anything else you want to share about putting these sorts of resources together? Anything that was particularly challenging or helpful in the process?
Sure. So, this one here that you have listed, the sample syllabus language, this was directly written by my action research teachers. This wasn't me. This wasn't the district office. This wasn't teaching and learning. This was our teachers that, that had been working and they were seeing some of the things that they wanted, they had an idea of what they wanted to see in the classroom for kids. And so when they came up with it and said, hey, can we add this? I was like, yeah, this looks great. I'll run it by our chief academic officer, make sure he's fine with it. And then let's go. But this is from on our website. We built an entire website around our AI work, PSD401.ai, and we did that because we'd started to build this giant collection of resources that we needed to put in front of our teachers. Um, we do have a. I was thinking on the last slide, listening to Tiffany talk about the scenarios, and we had built a use case catalog, but I love the scenario idea even better. So I might have to transition some of that work into more of these scenarios. But really, it includes things like how we wrote prompts and what are the problems we're trying to solve, so that people had that kind of that resource library to get started. Because that's one of the things that I've seen, in our district and working with other schools across the country is like everybody kind of gets it, but they don't really know, you know, how is it actually going to work for me? And so that's why we've kind of put together this whole, website around what could this look like for you in your classroom. And so this sample syllabus language is just one of them. We have our actual guidance. There's a data privacy uh, work that we did that's listed kind of under our guidance, as well as like what should you put in which tools and which things shouldn't you put in which tools. And so there's some of that work there as well. But yeah, there's a lot of things on the website that have been developed primarily with our teachers, hand in hand through our AI action research team.
I'm gonna throw out a curveball question just because I'm interested to hear. So what I love about the resources that your districts have developed is you're not putting like these really harsh black and white guardrails around folks, right? You're giving them some standard guidelines and asking them to live within kind of like what I would say is maybe like a spectrum, right? Just stay within here and make sure that you're upholding these values and these principles. How do you hold folks accountable, whether it's principals, teachers, students, to making sure that they are existing and playing within the guidelines that you have? I'd love to just hear what that's looked like. Maybe it's a specific example or just a general framework that you've used.
I'll start really quick and they can both jump in, but we've had this conversation in various iterations ever since we sent Chromebooks home, right? So there's been this ongoing conversation of, well, how do we deal with whatever, right? So I don't know how many times I've said in different ways to leaders in our organization, use what you already know in a non-technology world and transfer that, right? So an example just came up this morning. There was a situation where a student was being treated in a way that they didn't appreciate on the bus. And so they FaceTimed their parent and turned the phone around, and the parent was yelling at the other student on the bus, right? And so they're like, what do I do? And I said, well, what would you do if a parent was standing yelling at someone else's kid, right? Like, you know how to do that, right? You know how to. And I think that that's really why we didn't go with a list of you can do this, you can't do that. We already have and have had for a decade plus acceptable technology usage. That's written in all of our school systems, right? Students sign an agreement annually. We put that out there. AI just falls under that, right? There's just an acceptable uses of it. And I don't think it would be surprising to anyone for us to say, no, your student can't ask generative AI to write their own essay, the whole essay for them, and not put any of their own work in. That's not a surprising conversation, right? Just like you couldn't have Bobby write your essay for you and turn that in either. So I think it's utilizing what we already know and just being committed to having those conversations and not being afraid of them just because generative AI is in the conversation.
I love that. I don't have anything to add on that note, but I do want to ask Kris to talk about what he shared with us earlier about the English teachers and how they're looking at assignments? Because I think that's important.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So we were talking kind of before this started about, what does assessment look like in the age of AI? And so, um, because like I mentioned earlier, we've had English teachers on our team from the beginning who are now going, they're really starting almost their third year of working with AI in their classroom. They've been at it for a long enough time now. And one of the most fascinating things I see out of some of these teachers is the teachers that are grading process over product. And so, having kids, the expectation is that the students are going to use AI anyway, and just open up the class with that. Like, hey, we know you're doing it. Like, let's put this out there. Let's put this out in the open. Like, let's have a conversation about what does this look like, and turn in the things that you're working on. Give me your chat log. Share that with me. Share with me a link to your chat GPT conversation or your Gemini conversation, whatever it is. And then our teachers are really doing some fascinating work around just his in listening to him talk, and I'm going to do a terrible paraphrasing of it, but they can see the standards that they want the kids to hit, or the topics that they're trying to get them to grasp when they're teaching the lesson, and they can see that in what the kids are having the conversations doing. And for them, it's becoming more of a process over a product. It's everybody can turn in a report or an essay, and like Kelly mentioned, for 40 years now, kids have been turning in essays that may or may not have been theirs. Like, let's just face that fact. I think a lot of us have seen the research out of Stanford about the number of kids that cheated in high school 30 years ago and the number of kids that cheat in high school now. It's almost exactly the same number. It's like 70 to 71%. It hasn't changed more than 1% in 35 years or whatever it is. So, you know, maybe it's the product that, we need to look at, and maybe as we start grading and assessing the process behind it, we can get to some different learning. And that's one of the things that we're really spending a lot of time talking about now, is just using AI for the sake of AI is just going to make us do the same thing a little bit faster and maybe a little bit less human. And maybe it's time to start having conversations around how do we change education. I think that was one of the first aha moments for me when I met with these high school English teachers back in January of 23, is after their first 5 or so minutes of seeing ChatGPT for the first time and really just freaking out. They kind of calmed down, and one of them said, in our department meetings, we've been talking for 5 years about how we think we're teaching English wrong. And maybe this is just what we needed to kick off a conversation about how to adapt the way we're teaching and maybe actually start making a difference in some of the things that we're doing and some of the practices that we're doing. So,
And I
yeah.
love that. I love that so much, Kris, because the process is the most important part, right? Because if you get the process and you understand the process, that's a skill that can be adapted and used wide, right? If it's just honed in on the product, if that's the only thing that matters, that's very limited in scope. And what I love about it too is that if you can do that process, what your teachers are modeling, focusing on that process, giving kids clear direction of what steps of the process, when to use generative AI, allowing them to turn that in, those are exact skills that they'll be using in the workforce. Because think about what we do today with generative AI. If I'm going to use generative AI to help me write a letter of recommendation, I don't just say, hey, I got a guy named Kris on my staff and I want to write a letter of recommendation for him. I want it to be 1 page long. Can you write it? Well, they don't know who you are, right? I write a draft first. I review the person's resume. I write it up. And then I might put it in to have, generative AI tweak it for me. But I'm giving it all the information. The creativity and the information and the intelligence is coming from me. It's just amplifying what I already put in. And that's what we want students to learn how to do, because that's what they're going to be doing when they go to work in the future.
You're absolutely right. I don't know if anyone's done this yet, but Kelly, in a very similar example, I was doing something where I was using ChatGPT. I pay for the pro version so that I'm not paying in my data, and I used the talk to text and was talking through something, and I was like sharing my unfiltered thoughts, and I was like, I need you to go ahead and summarize this, and I gave it scaffolding. I was like, I want you to reproduce what I've said in a more professional tone, and I want you to put it in this framework. It was like pros, cons summary. And I was like, also based off of my tone and the way that I'm speaking, provide me your interpretation of how I feel about this. Also, too, and it was great. It was amazing. I need to do like a little classifying, qualifying thing, but I agree with you. You have to be the source of the creativity, the content, which I think is a great segue into what we're going to chat about, which is how do we apply artificial intelligence for student use and student learning in a way that I think honors the principles of scaffolding. The example I love to use is, at what age do we teach a student how to use a computer and type? And so does it make sense to start introducing them to artificial intelligence at that moment? Do we want students interacting with chatbots as soon as they can type, or do we want to start teaching them the foundational skills we know they'll need to start interacting with a chatbot and then wait to actually introduce them to technology later? I think there's a lot of really good questions to ask, and it's balancing, to your point, Kelly, like remove technology. What would our decisions been, period, in this space? And make the decision between kind of answering this urgency to innovate and to incorporate AI, but also not dismissing the principles of scaffolding. So would want to quickly, before I ask the panelists some questions, shed a spotlight on this district out of Wisconsin, Altoona District, ISD. So I actually learned about this district through Kelly, who had mentioned that the district had implemented a course for 12th graders on prompt engineering. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but I thought it's a perfect example of how we give students AI literacy skills at the right time for them.
Right. And I will just, before I get into it, say that I think what Tiffany said early on is really important to this topic, is your work and your guidance and your progression and when you introduce what, that has to be grounded and rooted in who you are as a district, right? Because we all do it a little bit different. And so your context matters. So you have to take that into consideration. But I love Sarah Radcliffe. I was reading Stacy's comment, by the way, in the chat. Really great comment on the World Economic Forum. So definitely, if you didn't read that, read it. It's good stuff. But Sarah Radcliffe, who is the director of Future Ready Learning at Altoona School District, shared with me that they are, and I think what they're actually doing is they're embedding it in their senior English course. So maybe just doing like a 4 to 6 week unit on prompt writing, which, what an amazing, we're stealing it, of course, because it's such an incredible idea. Because again, learning how to write those prompts in a way, because again, if you look at it from the point that you're amplifying your own intelligence and your own creativity, then that prompt has to be specific. Just yesterday, I was working on some images for a presentation that I'm doing in June. And so I was having generative AI generate the images for me that I want to use instead of just going to Google Images or something, right? I want them to be very specific. But the better I wrote the prompt and the more specific I was and the more information that I gave it, the better the outcome. Shocking, right? And so teaching students how to do this in their high school classes, I think, is just a really creative and very wise way to approach a skill that they're going to need in the workforce.
I want to tag in. I just put a link in the chat to a presentation one of our elementary STEM specialists did. And this is, when you think about it from the high school level, you also think about it like what is appropriate with some of our youngest kids. And so, he's someone that's out there trying to always on the front lines of figuring this out. But it's not putting kids in front of AI for the sake of AI. Like he's having kids go through, and some of the basic skills that they need to know. Like he's playing learning games with them. Is this AI? Is this not AI? Why is that the way it is? What's an algorithm? How do algorithms work? Some of the things like the teachable machines tool that you can, have kids classify images based off of what they're doing. And so he's done some really fascinating things, and that's just building those basic skills that kids need to understand what AI is. And that doesn't mean setting them in front of a chat bot and having them start to have a conversation. It's giving them the foundational skills that they have to have before, so that they can move forward with what they're doing.
Kris and Kelly have 2 great points, and I think Stacy put it in the chat. Kelly mentioned it, but the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report put out the core skills in 2025, and the first one's analytical thinking. And then as you kind of move through the list, number 6 is technological literacy. and some other ones that are super important, creative thinking, some stuff like that. But I think if, like Kelly said, you take the technology out of it, how would we teach decision making and writing without it? So even your littlest learners, you can start having the conversation about data privacy, about sharing information, about those technological literacy pieces, the soft skills, if you will, that will impact them when they get to an age where, based on your context as a district, you feel it's appropriate to start introducing those tools. Keeping in mind, right, a lot of tools right now are not designed for under 18. So keeping that in mind also.
Yeah. And I'll just add, and Fernando put this in the chat, right? And Kris hit on it a little bit earlier, that teachers are afraid because they're scared kids will cheat. And I think that goes back to the point that they're already cheating. They were cheating 10 years ago. They're going to cheat 10 years from now, right? And so we already, hopefully in your setting, you teach your teachers at some grade level, teach some sort of digital citizenship, because we know that our students, I mean, our students today, I mean, think about your students that are in class right now, whatever grade they're in, transitional kinder all the way to a senior, they will never live in a world from here on out that doesn't have generative AI. They have had technology, whether it's, Gmail or social media or whatever, their entire lives. They don't know a world without it. And so as much as I get that fear, we have to decide that we've got to take the opportunity to teach them how to use it ethically and responsibly, just like we do with everything else, right? Just like we did with a calculator. We have to teach them how to do it because it is the world that they live in, and it's not going away. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
I was chatting with a professor shortly after generative AI went viral and mainstream, and it was kind of first punching us in the face. And we were talking about how kind of grateful we were because it recentered a lot of the conversation when it came to student writing about fact verification and content verification. And with how quickly social media started gaining popularity, and then students started using social media as their source of news, I think we had the really urgent need to teach our students media literacy and reinforce the need for our students to go verify claims with actual evidence-based fact. And generative AI, I think, just really heightened that. And again, brought a lot of, I think at the college level, faculty members that had kind of assumed their students had already learned these skills. We're already doing that. They're already fact checking. They're already looking at peer-reviewed journals. Oh, no, we need to actually review that now because I now have another reason to believe my students need for me to reinforce that skill. So I think to your point, like generative AI is maybe like helping us really clarify, remove some of the fog around what are the fundamentals we need to be teaching students regardless of technology. It's just made that a little bit clearer for us. We have 3 minutes left, so I would love for maybe some final thoughts. I know, Kris, when we were having our little like pre-show chat, you had talked a little bit about choosing AI tools, and there are kind of the easy decisions that you'll make, like, is it going to steal your students' data? Like that's a table stakes at this point. But you had talked a little bit about some other frameworks or criteria that you use to qualify AI tools. So maybe if you want to just share a little bit about that, if you'd be okay with that being some of your final notes. Oh, you're on mute. Classic.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, and it's funny because this idea actually came from one of the people in the chat. Stacy Hawthorne had shared a research paper a couple of weeks ago about pedagogical bias, what's embedded into AI tools these days. And so, we were talking before this, about some of the things you do when you're looking at tools, and you look at them from a data privacy lens, and you look at them from a security lens. But are we looking at them for, does this match the instructional strategies that we want to be used in our classrooms? And so we've been having a lot of conversations ever since we saw this research paper, kind of around, are the tools helping us to move forward the instructional strategies and some of the, the pedagogical frameworks that we want to see in our classrooms, or are they hindering that? And do we need to, look at how, is that that's another lens that we now need to be paying attention to? It was one thing when ed tech tools were much more simple. Now that they're getting some of these, these capabilities that are above and beyond, we have to make sure that just like you wouldn't adopt a curriculum that doesn't support, for us, we're talking a lot about universal design for learning in our district. You wouldn't adopt a curriculum that can't be easily adapted into universally designed lessons. You got to make sure that you're also not adopting technology tools or ed tech tools or AI tools, whatever it is, that don't support that as well. So, yep.
I love that. I love that. Tiffany and then Kelly, any final thoughts or considerations from the conversation today?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Kris just said, and it brought something to mind. I just wrote it down while he was talking, that that idea of treat it like a curriculum adoption, right? And have the conversations, bring different people in to review the tools and talk about it through the lens of your guidance, your mission, vision, values, and who you are as a district, to make sure that you're not adopting something or supporting something that really isn't in alignment with what you want people in your district to have access to. So thank you for that, Kris.
Yeah, and I'll just add in a closing, I think it's really important to share your why with your staff and your students, right? So if you're not adopting something, share your why, because if it's with your staff, it probably is going to promote them being more stringent around data privacy and security, which we want, right? We need every end user having that same standard. But I think with our students, it's a great way to express to them and to model for them that there are things out there that are not, just because it's available doesn't mean it's safe. And we really, I think, especially in today's day and age, have just such an obligation to help our students be safe when they're working in environments where there are, chat bots and things like that. So.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here. Amazing panelists. Thank you for sharing your stories and your resources. My teaching coach, when I first started teaching, always said, "Great teachers good teachers borrow, but great teachers steal." So hopefully it's okay if other districts steal your approaches and maybe are inspired by the content you've created. So thank you so much. And if anybody is in this room is interested in learning more about Packback, please reach out to a member of our team. But of course, you will get access to this recording and the deck today. So thank you so much again for being here. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful remainder of your week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Bye, everyone. All right, I need to figure out how to end the webinar. They hide these buttons so well. Bye, everybody.